change, right? They don't change because of some edict by some ruler with a new list of rules, right? Culture changes or evolves incrementally as people's understandings change and the meanings they attach to each other's actions change.
Usually Michael Strong talks about close textual analysis of difficult texts. So according to him, Socratic practice it always has to do with difficult texts. For example, what about living experiences or experientials like having their own business or going to the ropes activities and then having a practice or a dialogue about it? As Michael.
Well, you can take this very literally
Okay.
as having to have Xerox pieces of paper with written language on it.
Uh-huh.
I say background reading. It more or less implies that there's a background reading in which students are responsible for understanding and group process. It sort of implies that there's something that the student has to prepare.
Can I jump in?
They might have to prepare it, but it isn't necessarily telling us that we have to do something ahead of time. We could encounter the text as we're doing now all together at the same time, having not prepared. What I was trying to get at is this idea of text doesn't necessarily mean black and white printed words on the page. We can think of text as any vicissitude in Oakeshot's language. And in a way, we're having to read all the time everything around us. If by reading you mean finding meaning.
Can I jump in? Sorry. If I don't recall what Michael's saying, explaining it, the idea of the text also implies that there's an objective thing to focus. Experiences are so subjective that you could divert. So here, Kant says that, no matter if Carlos agrees with enlightenment or not. So we can have one focal point. But we cannot do it with text, doing it with experiences or things like that is even more difficult. That's why I remember said that he uses text in that.
Absolutely. So that's why I say you can take this literally. Okay? And text allows for a common, something common to be tethered to. You know, we're all tied to understanding this particular text. That's why I started with text at the beginning, right? Something that we are all trying to understand. And it keeps us focused on something to understand. But just to answer your question, once people really have the skills of dialogue, you can expand this idea of text to be anything at all.
But it could even be a work of art at the beginning.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. The work of art, like the one that you presented us with,
Or in case of the sun,
was our text, and it was an invitation to find meaning in it. And if I disagreed with you, we still have that work of art to go back to and reference, and that's our common tether.
I have a question regarding the process. You were explaining to us that we have been preparing for the encounter of this more complex text. And my question is the preparation different when we have, as we have today, the whole morning and afternoon? And can the students remember, or can it be spread out? For instance, if I have only an hour, can I do one step at a time, and will the process work or not? That's something that I wonder.
My short answer to that is no. We don't have time, most of us, in the way we've constructed our curriculum, or even in the link class time we have, to really engage students in the deep process of changing their paradigms from audience member to or to give them the skills they need for analytical reading, or how to engage each other. Because this is an art that is evolved over time. It's a skill set that evolves. And it relies on an evolving culture, a rule set that dictates the conduct of each individual member. So I'm presenting you with some ideals to challenge us to think in a completely new way about what we expect of our learning experience. I'm not telling you what to do in your classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And that really remains the challenge. Once we really glimpse that there are other possibilities, much more profound possibilities, about the meaning of learning, and how that connects to human freedom and some of the values of the university's mission, then we need to get to work to figure out how this new culture, what this new culture of learning looks like, and what we should be doing in our classrooms. Maybe there's another way to cover material that we think we need to do at the front of the room with a PowerPoint. Maybe there's another way to do that that will free up our classroom time so that those who gather together can actually exchange and create and discover.
You have your schedule with your students 2 classes in a row, right?
I have 3-hour classes when I can convince people to give them to me. Yeah. And in a 3-hour class, you can do lots of different things that are reinforcing of the same concept or lesson. So it gives you a chance to deal with multiple intelligences and have a more transformative experience. So it's not just an hour, 10 minutes, or an hour, 20 minutes, and then they're gone. If you ask a living teacher a question, he may really answer you, unless he's me.
I like the part about a living teacher. Is there a dead teacher that answers questions?
Well, we'll see. We'll see why he says that. If you're puzzled by what he says, you may save yourself the trouble of thinking by asking him what he means. If, however, you ask a book a question, you must answer it yourself. And this is the part I think is so profound. In this respect, a book is like nature. When you speak to it, it answers you only to the extent that you do the work of thinking and analysis yourself.
Oh, now I get it. A book can be a teacher, but it's not a living teacher. It's innate, inanimal.
Inanimate.
Inanimate teacher. Sorry, I take it back. I take my. I found. It's in the second half of the paragraph.
So this gets back at your question, Carla, about
Yeah.
text,
Yeah.
right? In Adler's sense, the text is all around us. Nature is providing us with the texts all the time. But that text speaks to us only to the extent that we do the work of thinking and analysis ourselves. So we really have to, what is our mission as educators? To teach our students how to think and how to analyze so that they can hear what nature is telling them, so they can really engage in what it means to be a scientist. This is really what it means to be a scientist. If we think about that enlightenment in the historical sense, I mean, what do we think of that period of enlightenment? It's really where people discovered this, right? They discovered how to think and analyze, and suddenly nature was full of all these messages. Nature finally started speaking to us because we had the skills to listen, to question and listen. So we're very much applying the scientific ethic, if you will, to understanding this text as literal, black and white, on paper text.
I'm sorry, can I go back to that? If you imagine it in business, when you're planning a business, and the second part, instead of you, however you ask a book a question, you ask the market a question. And that's what we really want from our students. Let's see, I explain this out. Very much related to business in a way. It's a kind of thinking of asking to your own, and the text will be the information you have of the market.
Market-based learning.
Market-based learning.
Very cool. So then, we all want to know what the rule set is then, so that we can all engage effectively at deciphering text together. And that's very difficult to impart explicitly to you. In fact, I would say, because of the nature of learning, it's not something I can tell you. Much in the same way I can't really tell you how to ride a bicycle or drive a car. It's learned through participating in it. Pausing as I'm thinking of another quote. Let's go to this one. Human self-understanding is inseparable from participating in what is called a culture. It's useful to have a word that stands for the whole of what an associated set of human beings have created for themselves, beyond the evanescent satisfaction of their wants. This word culture. But we must not be misled by it. A culture is not a doctrine or a set of consistent teachings or conclusions about a human life. It's not something we can set before ourselves as the subject of learning, any more than we can set self-understanding before ourselves as something to be learned. It is that which is learned in everything we may learn.
I think it's consistent. Culture usually is defined as the set of habits, traditions, ways of doing things that a society adopts. And that is consistent with the last line. It is that which is learned in everything we may learn. We learn habits, we learn customs, we learn regulations, we learn ways of doing things. So it's something that we learn in everything that may be learned.
So what I really want to emphasize here is that what you're listing is only learned by participating in the culture. It's not something that's learned by being given the list of things you must do to be part of that culture. I mean, you can read a book about a culture, but until you actually go visit that environment, you're really pretty clueless. You have to be enculturated.
Yeah, you may teach a child to say good morning, good evening, thank you, this and that, But until he is either left out of the group because he doesn't do it, or he's alienated in some way, he won't learn to behave as in that culture. I learned the other day from Tono, from where we were in a colloquium, that in our world, sorry, but in the Arab world, you don't, this is the wrong thing to do. You cannot show you the bottom of your shoes. Tono, can you explain? I learned it from you.
No, I learned it with you.
But unless you live in that culture, it's very difficult that you don't forget. It's most likely you will forget until somebody tells you you're doing the wrong thing. Then you quickly learn. You learn once you are enculturated.
I don't understand the last sentence.
I have a problem
It's
with
difficult with that
Yeah.
sentence. I don't understand it.
Is that the last sentence? Help me here, because I have problems with Sparrow. Is this last sentence related to human self-understanding? Is that what the author is talking about?
Or culture.
Or culture?
Culture is
I
that
don't think
which
he's
is
talking about
learned.
culture at the end, but I'm not sure. That's why I'm confused.
Yeah.
I think what
It-
Fernando
I
was
don't know what
saying
the it-
was
It's
culture.
culture, it has to do with culture.
That's my confusion.
It
If
doesn't
it
know
is about culture, it doesn't make so much sense. It is about human self-understanding.
Yeah. I think it's about culture, because a culture is not a doctrine. It is not something we can set before. It is that which is learned. So culture is not doctrine, culture is not something we can set before ourselves. Culture is that which is learned in everything we may learn. In that respect.
But I think the subject,
It's culture.
but the subject of the whole sentence, of the whole paragraph is human self-understanding. The culture, I'm confused actually.
Yeah.
All the it's there, I don't know what's referring to.
I think in that sentence, the most important part is participating. It's inseparable from participating in what is called culture. So
What is inseparable from participation?
Human self-understanding. So it's talking about both.
At that point, I was okay with her.
So the it could mean culture or human self-understanding, since
But
he's
it's
saying
a-
that they're almost the same thing.
But it is useful to have a word that stands for the whole of what an associated set of human beings have created for themselves. It seems like he's talking about culture, but I'm not sure now.
I'm wondering if what it means is that in everything that we learn, we also, the culture is in there. As in, it is that which is learned in everything we may learn. It's embodied. Everything we learn sort of embodies a culture, and we learn it with that thing that we learn.
I think there's,
But it says that the culture is something that you learn. Culture is that which is learned. The culture is learned. How it is learned in everything we may learn.
That's the confusing part.
So when you learn something,
Like a bigger knowledge base, and culture is only part of this big knowledge base.
what is a bigger knowledge?
The everything that we may learn.
Yeah, we may learn things that are not part of the culture. But in everything we may learn, there's learning that is the culture.
If we could try to use human self-understanding. Human self-understanding is learned in everything we may learn. And if we go to the invitation of Michael Oxford, it said to disentangle oneself from the urgencies of the here and now, it had the same thing, and to listen to the conversation in which human beings forever seek to understand themselves. So maybe it's human self-understanding.
Yeah, for me it makes sense if it is human self-understanding, but if it is culture,
Unless it
It's kind of
says it's
confusing.
inseparable of culture.
For instance, I was thinking of the list we made when we came in. We had a list of 10 things that we learned. And implicit in those 10 things was a culture. And that is, I think, what he means, right? That we could extract from those things that we learned a culture. For instance, that there was coffee, that there was fruit, that the table was set up in a certain way, that we appreciated neutrality. All of that sort of amounts to a culture which is implicit in the things that we learn. I think.
Or how I might add to that is one of the lessons of that quiz is to get us to recognize that our learning is a result of the culture that we are already immersed in. And that by improving the culture, your capacity as a learner will be amplified. Right? We're really trying to work on the classroom culture so that students have the skills to be so self-aware and so aware of the others that they take advantage of all those possible moments of learning. But we illustrated at the very beginning that we already had sufficient culture to be learning already before there was any formal information given.
And I have a question, well, and that is regarding to what we were discussing in the group about the Enlightenment. Can we model a culture, a new culture of learning? Is that possible? Can we as professors or as...
That's a great question. That's a great question. And I want you to engage that question as we talk about the meaning of Kant. Because in a way, it is Kant's question to us. So hold that thought. I just want to hit you with one more thing before we have our dialogue on the...
Can we mean in the sense that can a group establish a culture? Is that what you're asking?
No, as in, can we in our classrooms be embodiments of this culture, of this new culture of learning that we're trying to learn?
That is a fantastic question, so please keep it, and we're going to discuss it in light of this article. So based on this idea that a culture isn't something that I can just give you the rule set for, it's something that comes from participating, right? I love this piece, this paragraph by Michael Polanyi. And I know a couple of you have run into it before. Polanyi says that maxims are rules, the correct applications of which is part of the art which they govern. The true maxims of golfing, or of poetry, increase our insight into golfing or poetry, and may even give valuable guidance to golfers and poets. But these maxims would instantly condemn themselves to absurdity if they tried to replace the golfer's skill or the poet's art. Maxims cannot be understood, still less applied, by anyone not already possessing a good practical knowledge of the art. They derive their interest from our appreciation of the art and cannot themselves either replace or establish that appreciation.
What is the art of the classroom, out of which the maxims arise?
What's the word thing?
It says, he talks about, out of the practice of an art emerge maxims that only take meaning with someone that has an appreciation for that art. So, what is the art that occurs in the classroom, out of which the maxims emerge?
What art are we practicing in the classroom?
Yeah.
What's the,
The art of learning.
The art of learning?
Could be the art of learning about something, maybe psychology.
The art of communicating.
The art of communicating?
Is inquiry enough?
The art of inquiry?
But the thing that it has to do with this word nonash here,
I don't know.
in the sense that leaving your somehow helping you to not, or to leave the non-natch period into a particular subject, so that you can do the learning for yourself, without having to need guidance from anyone. So
That's a good question. Let's table it for a moment so that we can really engage the text to answer that question. We'll do that in just a moment.
I'm having difficulty understanding from maxims to knowledge, to appreciation.
Which maxims?
The second, from maxims cannot be understood, that's unclear to me.
Let me give you an example. Florencia was telling us about driving earlier. Or she started out with cooking, then she gave the example of driving. They're both really good examples. You can watch someone show you how to cook, maybe on a television program. They can give you the list of ingredients. You can have all the information given to you. But when do you really know that you can cook something? After you've cooked it. And it's usually in that process of cooking it that you realize, oh, I don't really understand this, I don't really understand that. And that's where your art develops. You know, and any great chef is going to tell you they don't go by recipes. Because there's something in cooking that just can't be articulated in language. You just can't write it down. You can't write down all the nuances, all the knowledge you really need to cook. It's not in articulable form. You've got to participate in the preparing of the food, and then your understanding grows to that point where you say, I know how to make that dish. Right? Same with driving. Someone showed you how to drive the first time. They might have even given you really useful rules, really good maxims. Always keep your hands at 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock, or whatever it is.
The basics.
Make sure that you check your rear view mirrors. And, they can give you all of this good advice. But we all know that good advice isn't meaningful until after we already know how to drive in a way. It's useful, like he says. Maxims are rules, the correct applications of which is part of the art which they govern. But the true maxims of driving increase our insight into driving and may even give valuable guidance to the driver. But these maxims would instantly condemn themselves to absurdity if they try to replace the driver's skill. Right? You can't just give the list, no matter how clear and how extensive that list is, to a 14-year-old boy and then send him out on the highway.
I would like to connect it to something we have talked about, the idea of entrepreneurship and business plans. The business plans are kind of those maxims that you want to impose without the art, and the entrepreneurship is more that art that you have to. Eventually, the business matures, you set some rules. Many times we want to start with the idea of the business plan as a guidance of a new venture, and that's why we learn statistics like the chances of succeeding are higher if you change and adapt in a way
Sure.
that you stick to the original.
So if those
idea.
original rules are a straitjacket, you're probably
Yeah.
there.
So that's kind of those maxims trying to be imposed before having the practical knowledge of work that the entrepreneur actually learns in the process, and eventually set some rules.
So the maxims can't be understood still as applied by anyone not already possessing a good practical knowledge of the art. Suddenly, that teenager, after some driving practice, suddenly realizes why they need to continually check their mirrors. Why the position of their hands on the wheel are good, not at the bottom when they suddenly have to make a quick decision. Right? They suddenly realize that the rules have purpose.
It's the tacit component of the knowledge.
So, I'm just going to model a little bit for you how you start to one way to start making articulate some of the useful rules in the culture of the classroom that will be emerging from our experiences. So think of your one-to-one conversation. Think of the